We began today's gospel with the setting and the fact that the Pharisees and the scribes are being critical as usual. And this is just one line of the gospel which sets up the rest, but which is very important and should not be overlooked. St. Gregory, in commenting on this, says, "From which we may gather that true justice feels compassion, but false justice scorn, although the just are wont rightly to repel sinners. For the just, though without, that is exteriorly, they spare not rebukes for the sake of discipline, within cherish sweetness from charity. But on the contrary, they who from false justice are wont to pride themselves, despise all others, and never in mercy condescend to the weak, and thinking themselves not to be sinners, are so much the worse sinners." So before giving the dramatic parable of the prodigal son, our Lord introduces first two simpler, smaller parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin. St. Gregory, in commenting on the Good Shepherd's approach to the sheep, says, "But when the shepherd had found the sheep, he did not punish it. He did not get it to the flock by driving it, but by placing it upon his shoulder and carrying it gently, he united it to his flock." Anytime this reading comes up, and especially in light of what St. Gregory of Nyssa just said, I'm always reminded of hearing Father James Rowland, who grew up as a farmer and with sheep, who added the commentary that what happens when you pick a sheep up like this, which is not what they're used to, in fear they end up peeing all over you. And so there's an added love, shall we say, to the Good Shepherd here. And of course, in the rejoicing that happens with the finding of the sheep, St. Ambrose tells us, "Let this serve as an incentive to goodness for a man to believe that his conversion will be pleasing to the assembled angels, whose favor he ought to court, or whose displeasure to fear." And I would add to that, we want to remember this in all things, because we very often choose poorly. We choose sin because we're trying to please the wrong people. And St. Gregory also adds a comment that there is more merit to the converted sinner because they have farther to go, and therefore are more meritorious in arriving at righteousness. We also have this parable of the coins. St. John Chrysostom says, "But now is added a second parable in which the race of man is compared to a piece of silver which was lost." So we had the first parable where the race of man is understood by the lost sheep, according to the fathers, and now they see in this lost coin the race of man. In fact, one of the fathers, St. Gregory, will say that it's 9 coins that were not lost because those were the 9 choirs of angels. A piece of silver which was lost, by which he shows that we were made according to the royal likeness and image, that is to say, of the Most High God. For the piece of silver is a coin having the impress of the king's image. Of course, we see that in our own money. It's very interesting that even though we're supposedly rejecting monarchy, we still have the face of rulers, so to speak, and never mind. No time for that commentary. We have pictures on our coins the same. The heroes we are told by the government to honor. And St. Gregory follows up with this idea because many of the fathers understood this similarly. And because there is an image impressed on the piece of silver, the woman lost the piece of silver when man, who is created after the image of God, by sinning departed from the likeness of his Creator. This idea of bearing the image of God, even as sinners, is very important. St. Gregory of Nyssa also has a much longer commentary here, which for your sake I will summarize briefly, in which he looks at this idea of lighting the lamp and then sweeping the house is a way of using God's light, His truth, His word, to see ourselves, our house, more clearly, and then by sweeping it, by having it swept clean, then we're able to see the image of God more clearly. This week's reading also, of course, includes the parable of the prodigal son, but since that was one of the readings for Sunday in Lent, and I already commented on that, I'm going to not do so at this moment. And I want to return to this idea of the image, the divine image, the image of the king on the coin in this parable. We are made in the image and likeness of God. We're created male and female. God created us to share in his life, and he established the union of man and woman as mutual help and to create more souls for heaven. And therefore the devil has sought to undermine marriage and sexuality from the very beginning. I want to take this idea and speak then, as I continue my comments on abortion, in light of this divine image, because of a principle which I shared at the very beginning when I summarized all of this when I was speaking about abortion. The fundamental principle of right reason, which says that your ethics is informed by your anthropology. What that means is that the way you behave, the way you treat people, is based on what you consider them to be. In other words, when people, in the case, for example, not just of abortion, but like in slavery and in any other genocide, the perpetrators convince themselves and then convince others that the victims are not human, or at least less than human. And before you excuse yourself from this principle, thinking that you're not a culprit of genocide, this applies also to very many ways that we function on a daily basis, the way we treat anyone. I'll give you a very simple, common example. Clerks in stores and staff in restaurants. If you see the person as someone who exists to fulfill your desires, then you are going to be impatient and cruel with them. If you see them as a fellow human being, made in the image and likeness of God, if you have the compassion which the scribes and Pharisees did not, you will hopefully see them and even recognize, you'll see them as your equals, but also recognize any characteristics or factors which might excuse their lack. A lack of formation, lack of training, lack of age, wisdom, whatever it is, having a bad day, whatever. And you will see that they're simply trying to earn a living, support themselves or their family, and you will be more patient and charitable with them. So this is a very fundamental principle that really does apply to everything. Now, a lack of understanding of who we are, made in the image and likeness of God, especially as it relates to marriage and sexuality, affects, again, everything since God created us male and female. So this is not just simply a subject, it really is woven into everything. He created us male and female, that is, the compatibility of the sexes and their role in procreation of children is directly related to abortion. We use the phrase culture of death to describe the attitude of a culture which is contrary to life, both natural and supernatural, and what God intends for that life. I'm going to be quoting a bit or referring to Father Utenauer's book, Demonic Abortion, again, which I shared a little bit on when I first started speaking on this. On the subject of the culture of death, he writes, there are other elements that work together with surgical abortion to bring about a culture of death in every country of the world. We'll add that this is one of our many exports. These elements are the triad that we term the unholy trinity, since they are always found united in the work of killing life, marriage, and family. They are contraception, comprehensive sex education, and abortion. He says, comprehensive sex education, henceforth referred to simply as sex education, is the Planned Parenthood-style plan of total mental and social indoctrination of children's minds with perverse images and ideas concerning sexuality from kindergarten through 12th grade. It is comprehensive in many senses. It covers all topics relating to sexuality, It covers all levels of primary and secondary education, and it seeks to comprehensively alter children's basic system of values and thereby behaviors as a means to further the sexual revolution. These programs, they're very effective when it is implemented in the public school systems, but not just public schools, far out of the sight of the watchful eyes of parents. These programs are not chastity or abstinence education programs according to Christian standards. They have a devastating effect on the young. They hook them on birth control, indoctrinate them into alternative lifestyles, and open them to the idea that abortion is just another choice that they can make when promiscuity gets them into trouble. And because of this, it is essential that parents are aware what is taught in school and that they never give permission, especially in writing, without understanding exactly what their child is going to be exposed to. I say this as an alarmist because recently I was told about a young lady in this parish who was traumatized extremely by what was going on in the classroom and who really had to go through therapy, etc., and really didn't start getting back into more normal social interactions and such for about 2 years. She's a teenager. It affected her very much because it was just as she was getting to those years. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so emphatic on the need for Hispanic parents to learn some iota of English, because the mother simply signed the form that her daughter gave her without reading it. But it's not just limited to those who don't speak English. Very often I'm sure that happens for those who speak English. So we have to be very careful about permissions that are given and that we know what's being taught. This miseducation is carried out in the media as well. Between the schools, both public and private, and the media, our children are fed constantly ideas which are contrary to God's designs for marriage and sexuality. Nowhere is safe. When I say nowhere is safe, I have in mind, for example, Disney, which most people have the idea, oh, it's Disney, it's for children. That's what they want you to think. And they have included in their programming all the ideas that are contrary to this. And the more bold, they become more and more bold as we permit it. I'm not just picking on Disney, but Disney is the most insidious because it's understood to be, by most of the older generations, something for children. And it is, by Satan. I'll give you another example, though, that's not just Disney. Of an example of the ideas and the brainwashing that goes on. You hear this phrase in television and movies, and you hear it repeatedly and repeatedly, and eventually you start using it. I hear the phrase, either I have feelings for, or he or she has feelings for, as a way to describe lust, love, liking, whatever it is. And this phrase is used over and over and over again, and it gets into people's heads, especially young people, and they start approaching relationships with that as the standard. If that is your standard for a relationship, it is doomed. No marriage based purely off of feelings is going to last, depending on the couple, a week. But that is how it is described. And again, it's just one example. There are myriads of examples, but this constant, and this is why I'm so careful about, or I'm so adamant about being careful with what goes into your mind via your senses, and especially for our children and our young people, because this constant absorption of bad ideas, regardless of what they actually believe, will affect them and us, and eventually change their minds, even on a practical level. But I want to be very clear. Censoring is not the answer either. You can't lock your children in the garage for 18 years and protect them from everything and hope they'll turn out all right. Okay? So we have to be very careful with censoring as well. One of the antidotes to this poison that they're fed is to love them as they need to be loved. so that they do not seek love elsewhere. And they need the example from us of what real love looks like, so that they do not buy the propaganda of the false love that they see elsewhere. They need to experience it for themselves. The other thing is that we have to provide good things to feed our children's souls. Many well-meaning parents, and I know I can even come across that way sometimes, but that's not the case, simply tell their children, no, you can't watch that, no, you can't do that, which is fine. You should tell them no on these things. But the problem is that's not enough. You have to feed them as well. You have to give them something as a substitute. You know, movies are not the problem. It's what movies they're watching, right? It's not all television, although, again, for most modern things, there's always going to be enough things wrong with it that's probably censored. But the thing is, if you're going to take those things away, they need to be fed with truth, goodness, and beauty. And while you can't simply say all the old movies are good, they're certainly going to be a lot better than the stuff that's being watched now. So in other words, make sure that when we do try to keep this junk from our children, that we are feeding them with good art, good music, and good things which fill their souls as well. But especially, although not limited to, all things Catholic. Because of this miseducation, we do not have a proper understanding of masculinity and femininity, of fatherhood and motherhood. It was remarked to me recently by someone, and I found this point very interesting, that when we do not understand sex as in the marital act, then we come to misunderstand sex as in masculine and feminine, which is why we should not be surprised at the astronomical increase in homosexuality and transgenderism if we have rejected what sex is supposed to be, and we have. And because we've done that, we do not have a proper understanding of the dignity and nature of women. Women are the pinnacle of God's creation, naturally and supernaturally. I refer to Our Lady, of course. And not just when the young man is in love. That's the case always. But they have allowed themselves to be degraded by modern feminism by comparing themselves to men. Because women in general have more dignity than men, women have lowered themselves in trying to be like men. Because that's the whole problem. The accusation, which is not true, is sexism, is that women are not valued because they are not allowed to be like men. The fact is that looking around you, I don't know why women would want to be like most men. But the fact is that I got an amen. All right. The fact is that God created us male and female, and we need to live those roles as He created them for us. And comparison, which is always can be used as a tool of the devil, is not a good thing in this case. Now, this is not grounds for a logical argument that men should then want to be like women. That's ridiculous. The point is, be who God created you to be, and understand that role. I do want to add something which I forgot to put in my notes, but I remember this morning. I have thought for a while, based off of my understanding, is that many women who turn to homosexuality do so not because of an attraction, but because they're actually been traumatized and are running from men. But then Braulio sent me a podcast a couple weeks ago where someone was commenting on their experiences with transgenderism and pointed out that the reason many women turn to that ideology is because of the way they see women portrayed and treated, especially in impurity. If that's what a woman is supposed to be, they say, why would I want to be one? And if you look at the amount of impurity involving women in order to sell things to men, etc., then it's actually quite understandable, because that's not true womanhood. That is not treating women with dignity. That is degrading women. And so, again, I don't understand the psychology of it completely, but it does make sense. And so the way that we treat women is going to have this great effect on them, gentlemen. So make sure that you understand how you treat women must be with the dignity that they're afforded. Now, there are sometimes in individual cases where they don't act the way they should, but that's a different story. The point is that we do not. Part of this dignity, women, is motherhood, because it is integral to your being, to what a woman is. So we've been convinced by the devil to separate the unitive from the procreative aspects of marriage. That is, the fact that marriage is an exclusive bond between a man and a woman for life, and the fact that the marital act and bearing children is an essential part of marriage. By considering either of them unessential, we have effectively rendered them both unessential. And by doing so, we've reduced marriage to mere feelings, and as we said before, a relationship based purely on feelings has no foundation. I would add that I have seen articles where a woman said she married a dolphin, and another one where she married a bridge. And I've seen worse, and I haven't kept track of all of that. But the point is that that's what happens when you destroy what marriage is, by separating these two things. So the seed that was sown first with contraception in limited circumstances, and then no-fault divorce, those seeds have finally blossomed into full fruit with the queer ideologies that we are seeing, which are completely dismantling in all aspects God's purpose. And the end result of all of this is that we have a culture of death in which we murder the most innocent who are immolated in the worship of demons. Because this is what happens if you don't think that this marital act is meant to produce life. If it's not meant to produce life, then there should be no life. So therefore, you do away with it. There are economic arguments that are used to convince people that it's irresponsible to have children. Contraception is marketed as a way to reduce abortions, which of course it doesn't, because abortion promoters rarely, if ever, admit that contraception does fail, and it fails often. They don't mention it because when it does fail, it creates a, quote, need for abortion as a sinister backup. Again, from Father Utenauer. These are the standard tactics of the death peddlers. The logic of it was enshrined in a clear opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1992, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where Justice Sandra Day O'Connor admitted frankly, abortion is customarily chosen as an unplanned response to the consequences of unplanned activity or to the failure of conventional birth control. You cannot deny God's law unscathed. There is no such thing as a little sin, and certainly not when it comes to marriage and sexuality. If you defy God in this, who is our Creator and who designed us this way, that sin leads to death. Somehow, spiritually or physically, it is going to lead to death. And in this area, like in all areas of following God, if you are not following God's plan on this, you are following the devil. There are no other options. There are no excuses. If you are not following God, then you are following the devil. The choice is yours, but those are the only two choices.